Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to call the Coronavirus Ad Hoc Committee meeting to order for February 14, 2003. Ms. Carrillo, if you will, please call the roll.
Brenham?
Here.
Oh, no, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I have the wrong agenda. Barron?
Here.
Newton?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Our next order of business is the minutes, approval of minutes from December the 7th, 2022. Are there any modifications that we need to make to our minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
Ms. Carrillo?
Brenham?
Yes.
Barron?
Yes.
Newton?
Yes.
Motion approved.
Our next order of business is the adoption of the agenda. Mr. Brown, do we have any changes that we need to make to our agenda?
No, Madam Chair, no recommended changes.
Thank you. If not, I'll entertain a motion to accept the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Carrillo?
Brenham?
Yes.
Barron?
Yes.
Newton?
Yes.
Motion approved.
Next item is the election of the chair. I'll entertain a motion for the chair position at this time.
Madam Chair,
You recognize?
I nominate Gretchen Barron.
Is there a second? Oh, no, I'm sorry. Any other nominations? Please forgive me. If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Well, you still need a second.
I need a second. I still need a second. Yeah, I need a second. You want a second? Anybody? I'll second my own motion. I'll second
A second for what now?
for the motion
To conduct the vote?
No, I nominate, well,
nominated.
You don't need a second
I
for
don't-
nominations of an officer, do you?
We usually do a second.
Oh, okay. You've got it. Second.
All right. Any further discussion? Ms. Carrillo?
Brenham?
Yes.
Barron?
Yes.
Newton?
yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. And at this moment, I'll take a point of personal privilege just to thank my colleagues for entrusting this position to me once again. I think that the work that we've started and the work that we've done over the last couple of years have been tremendous. And as we move forward this year in making some final decisions, things that we started last year, I'm excited for us to continue to move forward as we administer the ARP funds. So with that, we'll move forward with our agenda. And the next item on our agenda is items for discussion. And we'll start with item 5A. Mr. Brown.
Thank you for recognizing me, Madam Chair. Actually, we're going to actually have Assistant County Administrator ACA Thomas to update the committee on this area.
Thank you. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to be here this afternoon. So I sort of wanted to walk through a chronological history of how we have gotten to where we are today and exactly then explain where we are with the process of allocating the funding that we allocated for the community groups through the ARPA allocations. If you recall, we actually received our allocations from the federal government back in May of 2021 with the first tranche of about $40.2 million coming into the county and the second tranche coming in July of 2022 of another $40.2 million for a total of about $80.4 million in ARPA funding. It was important to the council that some of these funds be reallocated to the community for use in groups and specific categories as was required by the U.S. Treasury. So in the summer of 2022, in July, council actually allocated $16 million to specific categories of awards for community groups. Those groups were $1 million to small businesses, $1 million to nonprofits, $1 million for educational assistance, $1 million for workforce training, $1 million for senior assistance, $2 million for food insecurity, $2 million for broadband expansion, $4 million for affordable housing, $2 million to house unhoused individuals, and $1 million for youth and recreational services. From that process, we actually adopted an application process and a rubric by which these would be scored. Council also approved using a third party to actually review all of these applications for Treasury compliance and for scoring based upon our rubric. We opened the application portal on September the 1st, 2022, closed it on October the 14th, 2022. We received 427 applications totaling over $107 million, requesting the $16 million that was allocated. Since that time, as you can imagine, it's been a yeoman's task to actually review these for compliance. The first step that our contractor Guidehouse did was to actually score the applications based upon risk assessment. This would be how risky would it be for the county to fund these in relation to the group's ability to receive and allocate these funds. From that process, we actually were able to come down to a total of 147 applications. Since that time in December, and where council approved moving forward and accepting that recommendation to accept those groups that had a risk assessment of 15 or higher, Guidehouse has also been reviewing these applications based upon the rubric score. They are very close to and have preliminarily evaluated and scored all of the applications based on our rubric and have presented what we believe to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 applications that may be eligible for county funding. If it pleases the committee, what I would recommend is that by the end of next week with your packet for your February 28th meeting, you would receive applications and review of those groups that would be recommended to be considered. This could then be considered in what I believe might need to be a longer session than a meeting. Given that you would have so many groups to review, it may be worth considering if there's another venue, like a work session of some sort, where you may want to spend 3 to 4 hours actually looking at these and discussing how these applications could be awarded. It may be that some might have to change their amounts. It may be that some might have some funding requests that may not be allowable, and that it could be that in some categories we have more requests that are actually eligible than actual funding, and at that point we would need to have negotiations relative to that as well. So, Madam Chair, with that, I'll turn it back over to you if you have any questions or any of the committee members.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas, and I just want to publicly thank you for working with Guidehouse and really maintaining the integrity of this process from start, and at some point we will be finished. But I do want to applaud you and Mr. Brown and the entire team for the work that you've done thus far. I'll entertain any questions that, if y'all have any questions for Ms. Thomas. Any questions? Ms. Newton.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas, and I echo Ms. Barron's gratitude for the work that you guys have done. I know that everybody, you rolled up your sleeves and whatever else you had to roll up to dig in and get this done. Just first, a few basic questions, because I was taking notes, but I missed some of the key numbers that you said. So if you could run down again, I don't need to start with the high number, but where we are now in terms of the number of applications that we have received that did meet the vetting, and what, if you know, total amount of funding request that represents.
Currently, there are between 50 and 60, and the estimate at this point is about $14.7 million. Not all categories are, from the first looks at the rounded numbers, some categories exceed what was requested, some categories do not.
And I was going to ask that question, so thanks for getting there. So then, again, among the applications that have been vetted, we have around 50 to 60, which represents around $14 to $17 million in requests for funding.
No, about 14.6 million.
Okay, sorry, 14.6. And then right now, and we've had so many conversations about this, the current process that we have is that council is going to take those applications and make recommendations on which ones we fund, or was there going to be any additional recommendations beyond these groups meet the criteria?
Guidehouse will actually point out some issues that they may see with each application. So if there are some funding requests in the budget that they think may be problematic for U.S. Treasury guidance, you will receive some of that information. So it will not be as simple as here's your list. There will be some other feedback as well with that.
Okay, I'll pause my questions for now. Thank you.
Mr. Livingston?
Yes, one thing to be very helpful for me, because I know I'm getting a lot of questions from my constituents about why was my application not considered, or why was it one that was not one that raised to the top. If it's possible, not right now, but at some point in time, what would be helpful is that you can just simply say, here's a list of things that led to applications, some applications not being accepted or something to that effect. So I'll have some idea of how to respond to those folks and ask the question, what happened, not specifically the application, but I'm just simply saying in a generic way, here are the kind of things that were considered during the process. And they'll know that that meant that was something they left out or whatever.
Yes, sir, we can certainly give that. The main characteristic that we would point out is that each application has to meet Treasury requirements for use of funds and be able to demonstrate that they can manage those funds as well. But we will get you a list
Good
of that.
example of what I'm talking about, yes, that'd be helpful.
I see you, if I may, just there. Ms. Thomas, to be clear, we discuss before that the applicants that are not going to be funded, that they would receive some notification and feedback as to why they weren't funded?
They will receive a notification that they were not funded. I don't know how generic why they were not funded would be, but I can certainly get answers to that. But they will receive notification.
And I think that would further support Mr. Livingston's question, and then as well, council doesn't necessarily need to have I'll speak for myself. I don't necessarily have to have, specifics on specific applications, but I think that if the applicants know, okay, you're not funded, and even if we have those categories from the risk assessment, even if they get a copy of their risk assessment, I think that's going to be helpful, especially for smaller nonprofits who are looking to do business with the county in the future. We need to set them up to be successful and to be able to help them along the way, because the last thing that I would like for us for any individual or any organization to walk away and say, the council, the county told me no, but they didn't give me any reason, no feedback or things of that nature. So I do want to just say, whatever we can give them that could help them and aid them in being successful the next go round, I think would be tremendous. Ms. McBride.
This is a follow-up to Is it on? Okay. The first thing I would like to know, and you gave it to me, but I couldn't take notes fast enough, how many applications were received?
427.
Okay, so the next question is that the contractor we used to vet these applications, they gave reasons for their scoring, right, for each application?
They actually have an assessment worksheet. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I would like to, others may not be interested, but I'm more prone to investigate or to review. So I would like to see myself, because it's already been established, and we already know, the contractor already knows why they didn't receive an application. I would like to see a summary of why each applicant didn't meet the requirements, whether it's because they didn't meet opera requirements or the budget or their priorities or whatever it was. Because that should be simple for the contractor to do since it's already been done. Ms. Barron. Again, with that comment, one of my major concerns in the beginning of this entire process was that would we give those applicants that did not have some of the experience that many other applicants might have, would they have an equal opportunity to apply for funding? And I know we did a little TA workshop But going back to what Ms. Gretchen said, is that it is so important that we be able to help those that didn't get funding with that type of technical assistance or support, so that the next time, whether they apply for funding for us or from anyone, they could at least look at reasons that they need to work on improving. And that has been always a major concern with me when we do grants, discretionary grants, and not give really enough training. And I'm not saying we didn't give them enough training, but when there's not enough adequate training for those that do not have experienced grant writers, but have the same need or greater needs than others. Thank you.
So I just want to insert also here. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Brown.
I was just going to communicate that you raised a good point, Ms. McBride. I want to take us just quickly back to the Strategic Planning Forum, where we identified that technically the county as a body really has one person that is a grant person in terms of not attached to any other form of grants that are paid for them. So in order for us to really do something like that, we would have to invest in staff who are then county staff on the county's budget rather than other grant funds that are supporting their work. So I recognize what you're saying, but I want to talk about what it's going to take for us to continue to go down that track, and that will be additional staff that will be paid for by county funds for something like that.
I perfectly well understand what you said and always supported having additional grant staff, having a grant unit that could really work with grants. So I support that initiative 100%. But I was thinking that there were funds and the opera funds that help with the administration. And at the time, I was thinking that the vendor or whoever we use would be able to help us do those things that I'm talking about now.
Madam Chair, if I may. What we've actually contracted with the vendor to do is to review and to score and to communicate those scores and the rubric scores to the county. We will then take that information and communicate it to the applicants. As far as training them about their mistakes, that may be a bit more than we've actually contracted with them to do. And with the monitoring that will have to be done on this on the back end, I'm not certain that our budget would sustain that.
I was not speaking of training, but giving them the feedback of why their grant was not funded. That's training within itself. So maybe I used the wrong terminology, I miscommunicated or you misunderstood. The training comes after you have identified their problems. Then we can take further that training part of it. But I was not thinking that the vendors would do that. Once we get our grant staff funded as needed, then we can look at doing that training, not only with federal funds, but even with our funds. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And so what I was going to state earlier is one of the things that we did in this process was to ensure that when we look at equity and we look at, a smaller nonprofit competing against a larger nonprofit, and then once they make the cut and they've been awarded these funds, that they will receive additional monitoring. And the monitoring portion is really, I appreciate this monitoring portion because if I'm a smaller nonprofit, we have already asked that the third-party vendor, go ahead and give them more monitoring to help them along the way, and then as well as just kind of tailoring it to it. Whereas I do agree 100% with Ms. McBride, and we've had this conversation, and one we'll continue to have, I'm sure. But as we look at, and we talked about in strategic forum, really looking at a uniform way of addressing our grants. It's going to fix a lot of it, but it's also going to really allow us to make a commitment to our nonprofit community to provide. That's going to be critical. Any further questions?
Just a follow-up. And I think you meant technical assistance rather than the monitoring, because we would monitor all equally. But you're meaning providing.
No, I meant monitoring, because with our monitoring tool, what we've, and if I'm misspeaking, Ms. Thomas, please let me know. But with our monitoring tool, one of the things that we said was that there are going to be some organizations everybody will be monitored from on a baseline, but there will be some that may need additional support that that a larger nonprofit won't need. So that is where, I guess that could be technical assistance.
Yeah, 'cause you have to
that could be, as I think about it that could be technical assistance, but we've kind of looped it in the monitoring portion.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Barron,
Yes.
because you have to be so careful with the term monitoring, because monitoring is almost like an audit. And so when you audit, you find something. So that's why I'm real careful about using the term monitoring versus technical assistance, being that all might be monitored equally, but the technical assistance part. Thank you.
Ms. Newton, did I see your hand?
Thank you. A question and a request. So the question is, once you have received approval from council to award funding to the specific nonprofits, what is the approximate timeline, or how much time will it take for those funds to be dispersed? And then are those lump sum disbursements, or is the plan to disperse them in some other increments?
The actual time to disperse will depend on how quickly we can get the grant contracts executed with the applicants.
Sure. So presuming then we have executed.
Right, and they have to understand the requirements of the grant. It could be that once some people understand the reporting requirements or what they may have to produce to be able to accept the grant, that some people may decide this is just not something that they're interested in. Because these are federal funds. This isn't like our discretionary grants where there's some county input as to what is and is not acceptable. So we have to work within those parameters. Once they decide that, and we can get those set up, there is each project may be different. I doubt that anyone, I won't say never because never's a very long time, but it is not our expectation that anyone would receive all funds up front. They would be funded in increments, and then much of it will be on a reimbursement basis or milestone basis.
Thank you. And then I forgot about the reimbursement basis. So it's not 100% reimbursement?
It depends if all expenditures that are submitted meet requirements.
Then my next request is that whenever we receive the summary document that we are going to get about these grant applicants, and I don't want to be limiting, so I'm happy to talk offline. I think for me, it's going to be helpful to see grant applications in buckets. So these are how many applied for the senior housing category, and this is the total amount the total amounts of funds that were requested. These are the total amounts of funds that are available, just a kind of running tab. And maybe that's what you're already planning. I know that without that information, it's going to be really hard for me, and it was easier to say up front.
Yes, ma'am. We will actually, everything that we're working with now is once we've gotten them into the categories, they stay within the categories because we are limited by category. So yes, ma'am, it will be presented in that manner.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Thomas, before we move to item B, give us a rundown. What's next?
The next item or the next steps that we see is that we will finalize the list from Guidehouse. They will come to us with their final recommendations for any concerns that they have, as well as explanations of those that are being recommended or recommended for consideration for funding. From that perspective, staff will pull together each group's application and scoring from Guidehouse, as well as their actual application that they provided to through the Zoom grants. We'll put those together in books for the committee so that they can be reviewed. And then from that point, it will be up to the committee to review those and then take to council for recommendations. And if I may have a point of personal privilege, I just want to say that, Sarah Harris joined us from what was Grant Thornton and Guidehouse to be our grants director. Sarah has been instrumental in helping us to work through these last steps with this process. So just could not have done this without her.
Thank you, Sarah. Mr. Livingston?
You mentioned the finalized list from House. When will we get that list?
I will have all the documents prepared with that list and available for the committee by the 24th. So when you get your next packets, they will be there.
And so, Ms. Thomas, you say the committee, but all council members will receive this same packet, or just the committee?
That's something that the committee would decide, because the committee will actually take the recommendations back to council.
And I ask that because our next item on our agenda is a work session. And even though the work session, the expectation, I would like to say is that at least the committee members would be here, but if there are council members that want to attend, I think that it would be helpful for them to have those documents so that they can review them and be ready to come in and provide any input. I know there are certain committees that we have that we're not privy to information prior to, and it wrecks me every time, because I'm like, I'm not ready. I feel like I'm not ready to have a full discussion. So I don't know if we may be skating the edge of the whole integrity of the process. Is that what we're looking at? And help me understand that.
To this point, part of what has stood apart with this program has been that council has been very intentional about having a process that was handled with kid gloves, if you will, without any interference or concern. Not interference. Interference is not the right word. Without any input from council, it was totally benign. To keep its integrity so that everyone was graded appropriately based upon their application. If a work session is what next steps would be, like any other work session, at the work session, the documents would be made to the public. The agenda would be made prior, but at the work session, the documents would be made to the public. If it is the committee's desire to have all council members to have that information prior, that would be up to the committee.
So I would like to just take a pause before we move forward and just hear. I know Mr. Brannon you had something you want to address, but I would like to just hear what your thoughts are about disseminating this information to full council, and if so, if not, when, that kind of thing. Ms. Newton.
Well, I guess I might need to think about this more if there's some other things that we're looking for, but every work session that has been held in my time in council has always been open to all council members. And so I would operate under the automatic assumption that all council members would receive information for a work session, because at work sessions, by our laws, no actions can actually be taken. It's just for further consideration. So unless there's some really compelling, if there's a reason no council members can have it, then that's one thing. But otherwise, I would imagine that all council members would.
You're asking for my thoughts on this topic?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, my knee-jerk reaction is kind of the same as Ms. Newton's. Just full information to the council.
And so, hearing that, I feel comfortable in making the request that we do make those documents available to full council for them to be reviewed during the work session.
Yes, ma'am. We'll make sure that happens.
Thank you. Just want to recognize Ms. English, who's joined us. Mr. Brannon, I know you had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, thank you. Just touching base again on what comes ahead. Thank you very much for the summary of what's happened in the past. This is, of course, my first meeting with this committee. There was $16 million originally allocated by council to specific sectors that kind of falls under the jurisdiction of this committee. And then, from what I understood, we're down to approximately 50 to 60, what we might call qualified applications that potentially in full could represent 14.6 million. All right, Ms. Thomas?
I'm sorry?
The
repeat that again?
applications that, the 50 to 60 that were referenced earlier, that are kind of still in consideration, they total approximately 14.6 million.
Yes, sir.
And again, I understood that some of these categories, they would be exceeded, just based on the applications that made it through. But as it is right now, there looks like there's a difference there, 1.4 million minimum, just based on the 16 minus the 14.6. In the event there was some money left over, what would we have to do there? Maybe would there need to be a council vote to potentially transfer that money to different uses, or has anybody thought that far ahead?
That would be a council decision.
Mm-hmm. Is that something likely this committee would discuss in the event it occurred?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you.
Further discussion on item 5A? Okay. If not, before we move to 5B, I don't know, I know we originally, Mr. Brown, I'm directing this to you and Ms. Bennett from Communication, and that, thank you, Ms. Thomas. Have we thought about, I know we made a press release when we decided to delay the award. I think it would be helpful when we leave this meeting, to again just kind of keep the general public aware of where we are with these meetings and dispersing the funds. Because of course, I don't know how many council members, but have received phone calls and emails when they saw that we were meeting again. But the question was, are we going to be making an announcement? And so I would like for us to be able to get in front of that, to communicate even some of I jotted down, I think there's about 4 or 5 steps that we still have left that Ms. Thomas so eloquently laid out for us, just to so that the general public can say, hey, this is where we are, this is what came out of this meeting, and this is where we're moving to. Is that something that administration thinks
doable.
that it's important or doable is a
Yes,
good
ma'am,
word?
that's doable. We certainly want to make sure people stay informed. We don't want to create any issues for any members of the committee or the council by having information that is not clear for the community. And that's something that we're certainly able and willing to do, and we'll work towards that.
Thank you. And I think that will also just kind of lend to give council members language, and as we move forward, that we're still in sync as one whole, as a group, as to how we're addressing this pot of money. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you.
And so our next item is a work session. As Ms. Thomas has already mentioned, that we are looking to host a work session to be able to look at the 50 to 60 applications that we have. And I guess Ms. Thomas or Mr. Brown even, which we probably need to just kind of, if you could give us what the expectation is. We know that what we're going to be doing during this time. What is our time frame that we need to allow for, so that we can start to look at and get with the clerk's office to schedule something?
Yeah, I think based off just the conversation that we've had here in this short amount of time, and really the impactfulness of this information, you probably want to schedule a few hours at a minimum, maybe 3. And then, members of the body decide they need to step away. They know it's being recorded. They know we can follow up with them. But I would imagine that something of this magnitude, you would want to give yourself a few hours for consideration.
So we're safe to say 3 to 4 hour time block that we need to dedicate.
I would say plan on it. If you use it shorter, it's fine.
Sure.
But I would hate for you to schedule an hour or 2 hours and then feel like you're rushing and not everybody's able to get their proper level of consideration in the process that they're looking for. So just a thought.
And this work session will take place. It is as if it was any of our other work sessions, open to the public and such.
Work session will be open to the public. We will treat it like we're treating this meeting. We anticipate recording it and having it for a future view for this body or anybody in the public that would like to see and participate, even if they can't be present on that day.
Thank you. And so with that, I would like the clerk's office to look at our calendar and let's try to, we know that we're going to get the packets coming up next week, right? So with that, we'll want to get on calendar, the first, second week in March to be able to schedule something. And I know it's going to be tight, but I think you work in miracles. You can make it happen.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Ms. Newton.
if I may, and I'm just one member of council, my suggestion would be that we look at a 3-hour meeting as opposed to 4-hour meetings, just because while it is substantive work, it can expand with expectations, and I feel like if we can hold it down in 3 hours, that's better. Second, it would be lovely. I know there are a lot of schedules to coordinate, but if there could be some level of coordination at a minimum with committee members to kind of look at polling dates before it just shows up on our calendar. There have been a few things that have shown up on my calendar recently where I have conflicts, and that happens, but I didn't know it was coming, and so I didn't have a chance to make alternate arrangements. And then finally, I don't know if there's a way we can have an offline conversation or if we need to have a separate meeting. I think that there's going to be a lot of material to go through. And this cannot be an effective committee meeting if the expectation is that we come and have all the information presented to us and then decide. We're gonna have to do a lot of digesting beforehand. And I don't know the way that we do this conversation I'm suggesting, whether we're sending emails or we need to have another meeting to talk about it. But I just think that if we had some sort of framework that we were using to facilitate our conversation, that it would be helpful, because coming in to look at 46 applications where, it's cold turkey and we're all going line by line, I think would be a lot. And I want to make the most of everyone's effort.
I totally agree with you. And so maybe I'm just Pollyanna. I think you're supposed to all meetings prepared. So. But we are not going to go down that rabbit trail. So I hear you, and if it means that we need to do what we need, if once we get our packet, I think we'll have an idea as to what we need to do, and if that means that we need to reconvene and have a meeting before the work session, I think that we have that flexibility.
I think we can certainly via email circulate some proposed structures for a work session and see if we think that'll be sufficient.
So anything further with our work session? Yes, Ms. English, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just curious as to know if this work session can be also via Zoom.
Well, I'll throw this to the administrator, but I think all of our meetings, we do have the work session, and then now with our new rules, you do have the opportunity to call in.
That opens the.
Absolutely.
Thank you, ma'am.
Absolutely. We want as many people, and I want to just say this on the record, we want as many council members as possible to participate in this work session, because I think that we've been hands off for the entire process, but this gives us an opportunity to have input in the projects that are being presented to us, and then kind of work through the tough questions in the committee and in the work session, so that when the recommendation comes to full council, it's not as if this is the first time you saw it. And so I would just encourage all our colleagues to either call in or come to the work session so that we can really dig in and find the best applicants and come up with the best ways, because I do believe there's going to be some creativity that we're going to have to to look at, because as Ms. Thomas reported, some of the pots of money have requested more than what we have allocated. So with that, we've got to come up with a strategy to address that even. So please, everybody come. Our next item on our agenda is other topics, and we just have that out there in case there was something else that we needed to cover that was not included, but it wasn't included on our agenda. So I'm assuming we don't have anything, we didn't amend our agenda to include that. And so with that, our last order is adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Ms. Brillo?
Brenham,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes?
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
We're adjourned. Thank you all for attending.